Hallo und herzlich willkommen bei 99 zu 1. Ja, ich freue mich sehr, dass wir heute mal wieder eine tolle Folge machen und Vegh Weis. Valeria war schon bei uns in einer Folge mit Lea eingeladen zu Kriminologie und Marxismus. But right now we're going to switch to English. Welcome to 99 to 1. We're going to have an interview with Valeria Vegh Weis. She is law professor at the university for criminology and transitional justice at Buenos Aires University and National Commerce University. And in Germany, she's currently a research fellow at the Universität Konstanz Zukunftskolleg and associate researcher at the Max Planck Institute for European Legal History. And she has a long academic trajectory history, fellowships including the Fulbright and the Alexander von Humboldt. We've already been talking about her first book, Marxism and Criminology. But today we're going to talk about her book, Bienvenidos al Lawfare, which she's one out of three co-authors. And I'm really, pleasure to have her here today. I'm sorry that we don't have the picture in the background, but I'm sure in this format it will be fine. Welcome, Valeria. Really nice and a pleasure to have you here at 99 to 1. So you can talk about your book, Bienvenidos al Lawfare, and explain us what the lawfare means.
Yeah, so, and I just want to clarify, like just for the ones that said, "Oh, I don't speak Spanish, I will not be able to read the book." Yeah, you will be able, because we have signed a contract with Brill and with High Market Books, and it will be out this year or next year in English.
That's a really awesome news. Yeah, I'm really lucky to hear it because I think that the lawfare is not just a thing that can happen in Latin American and Spanish-speaking countries. I think it's really important and crucial to have it out in English and other languages as well. Yeah. So our first question is, why did you write this book?
So the concept of lawfare is not very clear because it's of course an English concept that started to be used in Brazil with the case of Lula, and then it expanded throughout Latin America. But it mostly talks about the interventions of the judicial power in democratic politics, so that when things don't go as desired by the neoliberal power holders, they are not in government, or they cannot go as far as they want in their economy plans or in their economy agenda, then the judiciary is used to intervene. And this involves a lot of very detailed, dogmatic criminal law, criminal procedure challenges that are very difficult to understand for the ordinary people. Because, of course, like, law is about making things very difficult so nobody can understand them. And we wanted to do exactly the opposite. We wanted to write a book that was very, very easily to understand, that it has jokes, that it doesn't have a lot of footnotes or sources, but that it tries to explain very, very clear to the general public why the judiciary cannot intervene when discussions in the legislative power or in the executive are not going as desired. The relevance of respecting democracy and the role that the judiciary should have and should not have. This was our main goal, to really make things easy to understand for everybody.
Yeah, you definitely are right about the thing that it is important to understand it. And I was actually surprised that it wasn't such like a boring academic paper or book, rather than it was pretty good to understand for me as a person who didn't grow up speaking Spanish and who recently learned to speak it. So let's continue with a hypothetical thought experiment. You're starting with such an experiment in the book. in the introduction. Imagine you want to stop a popular opponent or political leader. What would be the best strategy in order to eliminate the politician? How would you act? Which instructions would you give in order to destroy your political opponent or to avoid him to get into power to win the government or presidency?
Well, yes, exactly. The book starts like with this game, with this hypothetical situation about how to deal with this political opponent. And there we make it clear that it's not enough with the judiciary. We were talking about the role of the courts, but indeed it's not enough. It's very, very important to also have the media involved, media and social media. So if we want to start a lawfare against a political opponent, then we need to make up a real terrible crime, in general economic crimes like corruption, like in general without many details. And then we need to have like a very prestigious lawyer from the opposition to go to the court and present a claim. But most important is to have tons of mainstream media and social media. It could be also not real social media, but it could be through trolls, bots, and all the mechanic automatic robots that are working behind the network to repeat the message all the time. And we need to have like a name that can like reach the population. So, for example, in the case of Argentina, lawfare mostly attacked Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, who was the former president and now is vice president. So her surname starts with K. So everybody started saying in the media, corruption K. So that sticks in our mind. Corruption K, corruption K. It's like a nickname that can allow everybody to start repeating something without even knowing what it is about. And this is again with all the scandals. In the case of Lula, it was Lavallato, that it was like, that is a place where you clean cars, that was below the place where the apartment that he arguably got through illegal means was located. But then everybody was Lavallato, Lavallato. So people don't know exactly what they are talking about, but they know that there is something called Lavallato, which is a very easy name to remember. Then they know that it has to do with corruption, even though they don't understand really which is the criminal charge. And they know that it has to do with Lula. The same with Argentina. So you have this like nickname that is very attractive, the word corruption without a lot of details, like the name of the accused. And that is repeated once and again in the mainstream media and in the social media until you even forget that you don't know about the topic. And you are sure that you have enough evidence that you have read already about why the person in question is indeed guilty.
So the media strategy is basically throw a lot of dirt at them, and some dirt will stay at your political opponent. But on the other side, can you maybe explain us for the destruction of the criminal law, how does it work, and which techniques from past dictatorships that destroyed the criminal law, like racist colonial systems, Nazi Germany, or Stalinism, which of them do you know? How does it work?
So the main difference between like Nazi Germany or Stalinism and even the dictatorships in Latin America is that the lawfare takes place within democratic politics. Indeed, it is argued that it's a replacement of state terrorism, dictatorships, and oppressive regimes that destroy democracy. The idea is to respect democracy, at least formally, and instead of going with tanks and take out the former chancellor, the former president, the one that we dislike, the idea is to respect democracy formally, but make their governments impossible through charges of corruption in the judiciary, or to make it impossible for them to be elected, even if the people are in favor of him or her, by charging them with crimes in the judiciary that will that will make it impossible, legally impossible for them to compete in democratic politics. So we have the two examples. I will go back to Argentina and Brazil. So in Argentina, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner was in government, and instead of going with the military and taking her out of governmental office, what they did is was presenting one case after the other one, until one day she had to go to court and present and declare in 8 different cases on the same day. That it was also the day of the death of her husband. So a very delicate day. So that makes like the running of the government impossible. I don't need to go with like guns and the military to take her off. I just delegitimize her by driving her to court and having all the media there saying, oh, she has 8 cases on the same day. Imagine how corrupt she is, that she has 8 cases and they are all so important that she has to declare in all of them on the same day. And the other way is the way of Lula. He was already leading the polls to become the president of Brazil. And then the case for corruption was presented while the campaign was ongoing, and the final sentencing was an obstacle for him to present himself as a candidate. So he was not legally allowed to take part of the elections. So even though he was the obvious winner, he was not legally allowed to take part in the elections. They had to choose a random candidate from one day to the other one. Of course, the candidate didn't have enough votes. He lost. The extreme right wing of Bolsonaro won the elections. And then the lawfare was not like in Argentina that made government impossible, but it made directly the elections impossible. It didn't allow Lula to even take part of the democratic game and be elected by his constituency. So these are 2 different ways in which, instead of using the military, lawfare is used to make democratic politics impossible without formally, at least, destroying democracy.
So those are basically like the 2 most famous cases from Cristina de Kirchner y Lula da Silva. Just throwing a lot of dirt at them and starting like opening processes against them, or even like putting them into castle in order to not let them to be candidates. It's like a surgery that you're like just cutting out this tiny piece, which is like the danger for you. So maybe can you explain a difference between past vengeance justice systems and in your book you called it populachero, like I don't know how to translate it, maybe gangster law in Latin America. Like what's special about this like populist badass gangster law there?
Well, in general, all the governments that are attacked through lawfare are part of what is called populism, which means, like my co-author Cristina Camaño describes it as the governments that give more rights to the people. So these are like what we will call here in Europe welfare or social democrat governments. Not necessarily the SPD, but like those that try to really broaden
the early SPD.
Yeah, that really
the last
try
century.
to broaden the scope of rights that the people have, without being necessarily revolutionary. So these are not, or neither Cristina nor Lula nor Evo Morales in Bolivia. They are not communist. They are taking part in bourgeois politics, but with a social democrat, progressive, what we call populist agenda that has to do with trying to a little bit shape the economic this country and give more resources to the people that has the less, and also to give rights that are not necessarily associated with the economy, like equal marriage, right to abortion, quotas for trans people to work in the government, etc. So it has to do with also with the engagement with grassroots movements, the integration within Latin American countries, instead of like supporting the politics of the United States against our neighboring countries. So more or less a little bit like a social democrat politics, and this is called populismo in our continent, and we argue that lawfare is mostly used against this type of government.
So you called the malo cósmico, like the cosmic evil, like the example you already mentioned, corruption is the most famous one, and the stereotypization of your political opponent as poor, which is like a synonym of criminal, lumpen, proletariat, and corruption as well. Like those stereotypes in the case of Bolivia and Evo Morales, like a lot of racism is playing there as well as part into it. So how does this cosmic evil work, and which function does it fulfill?
So this term cosmic evil is brought by the other co-author, Raúl Zaffaroni, who is the judge of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. Well, former, he has just quitted his position. And he talks about cosmic evil to describe that, okay, there is a case of corruption, we go on with our everyday life. A little bit as it happens in Germany, right? Like we have 11 years to build Brandenburg Airport, but like we talk about corruption, but it's not like something like crazy that is like destroying our everyday life. But in Latin America, these charges of corruption go further on until they become this cosmic evil. It ends up like to be like the explanatory platform for everything wrong that happens in our everyday life. So
and in some cases, corruption is actually like a huge problem in Latin America because it exists on lower level to a degree that is incredible. That is like compared to Germany, like a real problem that can affect you.
Yeah, it's true, but it's true also that corruption also exists in Europe and at huge levels, as we saw with the charges against the current chancellor, or as I was saying with the Brandenburg Tor Flughafen, and with like mostly not even with like exclusively corruption, but what we call state corporate crime, that are things that seems like business as usual, but they are not. For example, like the fact that a former chancellor is part of a Russian corporation dealing with gas, like that is not necessarily as drastic as being in the street in Bolivia and being asked for money by a policeman, but it's even worse. But it's like more like business as usual. So it comes with this other image that seems cleaner, but still corruption, structural corruption, is a phenomenon that exists worldwide. But in Latin America, maybe because, as you said, it's like more micro corruption from the very low levels of government, just in relation with the low salaries, with like the fact that they don't have stable jobs, etc. It's easier to feel that it affects us individually. So the connection between Schroeder being in Russia and my everyday life in Berlin is way more distant than if I see that that the guy that is in the Bezirk where I live in Argentina is being corrupted. So we like this concept of cosmic evil like tries to explain how corruption becomes something that is terrible and that is like immersed in our everyday life. So that if the bread is more expensive today, that is because Christina got money that she's not using properly, and then bread is not accessible for my finance. It becomes an explanation for all the painful situations that citizens experience in their everyday life. And that is why it's not just a crime that we could analyze objectively if it happened or if it not happened, but it's like it becomes an overall explanation of all the bad things that happens in politics, economic, social life, etc.
Yeah, very good point, very good explanation. Do you have any other ways to destroy the criminal procedural law, or did you already mention?
Yeah, so we were now talking about criminal law, right? And
Yeah.
in terms of criminal law, that is the topic of this chapter 1 of the book. For the lawyers that are in the audience, particularly the criminal lawyers, what it's used is first to talk about this thing about corruption, that indeed there is no criminal offense that is called corruption. There are many criminal offenses, but no one is called corruption. But people talk about it as if it were an actual crime. So first, this destroys the criminal law, because indeed it's very important in criminal law to respect what is actually written, because each offense is there in order to inspire citizens to know about it, respect it, and avoid perpetrating a crime. When we talk about corruption, when it's not associated with any specific charge, then we are really not respecting the principle of legality. It's also the case that a crime, a charge that is usually used is, I don't know how it's saying in English, illicit association, unlawful association. That is when you have 3 or more people that get together to commit a crime. It's not even a crime. A crime is is an action that happens prior to committing a crime. It's associating in order to commit a crime. And this is constitutionally problematic because it doesn't involve actual actions. It involves a way of getting involved with others in order to plan a future crime. Another thing is that criminal law is very respectful of the principle of authorship. So if I kill someone, if I am accused of killing someone, I have to kill that person myself. If I help to kill someone, then I can be charged as a participant, but not as the author. But in lawfare, this is not the case. And for example, Cristina, Lula, or Evo are charged by actions committed by people in their governments over whom they don't have a very strict control. So these are just some of the examples in which criminal law is not respected in order to foster lawfare.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. You already explained pretty good the use of media. Can you explain us how or which methods, strategies are they using in order to destroy the how do you call it?
Criminal procedure.
Yeah, and then yeah,
Climatic criminal law, core law. What are the offenses? Homicide, robbery, like all the crimes that you can see in a criminal code. The second chapter, in order to make someone find someone accountable for a crime. So it has to do with the procedure, with the process that the state must follow in order to impose a sentencing. The first one is about the charges. The second one is about the procedure. Well, in terms of procedure, rules that have to do with our democratic states and with our constitutions. The first one is called forum shopping. That it has to do that, of course, not all the judges and prosecutors wants to get involved in lawfare. Many wants to respect the law, many wants to act accordingly with the constitution. So this forum shopping allows to make it possible that all the cases that we want to become part of the lawfare end up in the same courts, where the judge and the prosecutors are in line with our desires of persecuting certain leader. So this is against what is called the natural judge and the right to have a judge that is impartial and that doesn't have any bias. So I am Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner. Someone presents a case against me, and instead of having a clean lottery where the case is assigned to a certain judge without any manipulation, the cases are manipulated, and indeed they always end up in those judges that already accepted to collaborate in lawfare and go on with the case even when there is no evidence against the accused. This is like the most clear example of criminal procedure.
Valeria, We just lost connection to YouTube, so sadly we have to start the stream again, and maybe we have to repeat the question. I'm sure later we can unite the two streams, but I don't know what happened, but the connection was too bad for my laptop. So we are very sorry about the little interruption, but I'm sure later we can unite the two parts of the interview. So we are back live again at 99% here with Valeria Vegh Weis about the lawfare in Latin America. And yeah, we've been talking about the populachero law in Latin America, populism, and my next question was which function fulfills the cosmic evil, like corruption or the stereotypization of a popular leaders or as poor lumpenproletariat, which is corrupt or doesn't have like the same values than the good society. So yeah, go ahead.
Yes. So I was telling you that like the cosmic evil is a concept that has been brought by my co-author Raul Zaffaroni, which is the former judge of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. And with this, what he means is that corruption is not understood by through lawfare as an ordinary crime that can be investigated and judged in court appropriately, but is presented by the opposition, by the mainstream media, by social media, by international reports of international organizations such as Transparency International as a terrible evil that can explain everything bad that happens in society. So the idea is that when like someone is not able to afford bread or is not able to find like a stelle in the kita for their children, they can associate it directly with corruption. So it like corruption gets involved as a terrible evil in every bad thing that happens in the life of the citizens. And the feeling that is trying to be fostered is that if I cannot afford bread, that is not because of the economy or COVID or my particular economic situation, but is directly related with the fact that the president or the chancellor has committed something related with corruption. So that impact is direct, and that is the main explanation for everything bad that happens in our society at the economy, political, or social level.
Yeah, and that's why people shall get like really angry at them. That's why they don't deserve to be democratically elected president. That's why they have to be at prison, etc. Yeah, do you or can you tell us about other ways to destroy the criminal procedural law?
So I think that we were talking by now about criminal core law, so criminal law. That is the focus of chapter 1. So the book is organized in 3 chapters. Chapter 1 is criminal law, which has to do with the charges, like with the crimes that someone can perpetrate. So robbery, murder, rape, like the actual charges in the criminal law. Chapter 2 is about criminal procedure, so the rules that the state must follow in order to find someone accountable. Because we live in democracy, we cannot just put someone behind bars without a pertinent procedure. And the third one is criminology, so the socio-legal study of crime and punishment. So in relation with the first chapter, as I was saying, criminal law, criminal core law, there are a lot of problems in terms of lawfare. The first one is that the principle of legality is the basis of criminal law. And it means that in order to be found accountable, in order to have a case against me, I need to be charged with a specific offense so that I can know about it, that it has been written in the criminal code, that I had the opportunity to be inspired by the law and to follow the rules, and I didn't. But in lawfare, we talk about corruption in general, when there are no real charges behind them. Maybe they are charges that are not specific about corruption, but it is sold to the public under this label, corruption. Corruption is not a charge, it's not a criminal offense that can make someone accountable. We need to specify which is the charge. And sometimes these charges are so crazy, so not related with real offenses, that the media, the opposition, the organizations involved in lawfare don't talk about the real charges and talk about corruption in general. Just to give you an example, in Argentina, the former president Cristina sent a project, a bill, to the parliament to discuss a possible agreement, a possible memorandum of understanding with Iran in order to clarify a terrorist attack that happened in Argentina in 1994. They started a criminal case against her for treason. Treason is a charge that it doesn't have any basis. It's something that happens only in the context of war.
Free interpretation.
So exactly. So of course, this was not possible to be a real charge that like people that you could explain to the public in the media, because it didn't have any basis. So the media talks about corruption in general, and they don't explain in detail what is really happening, what is the real charge, because if they do, then the public will find out that indeed there is no real case, not real serious case behind it. I have a practical question. I don't see any message from the audience. Does it mean that we are nevertheless online?
We're online. There are just no questions because they're recently coming back to the live stream.
Okay. Just in case that not to speak to the void.
We are live. But so, yeah. What do you think? What are different elements from this type of political persecution? Like, because they're basically like destroying the right to have a fair process. What are like typical techniques, strategies in order to do so? Like, I don't know, maybe filtering, intimidate information, or like fabricating fake news. Can you tell us a bit about the actuation that happened in the past?
Well, so we were talking about the first chapter on criminal law and how it can be distracted through, like, for example, talking about corruption and not specifying the specific charge against the accused. Now you're asking me about criminal procedure, so about these breaches in the rules that are supposed to be respected in order to find someone accountable. Well, in terms of the procedural rules, as you said, filtering or listening to private conversations is something that happens very often in lawfare. So, like conversation between Lula and Dilma Rousseff, that was the president at the moment, were filtered to the press, and they were like being heard without a judicial order that had enough support, that was related enough with the research in the case. Another situation happened in Argentina, where we arrived to the very crazy situation in which the conversations between an accused and his lawyer in the prison were heard. So if in general, like the hearing private conversation should be a mechanism of last resort, because the state needs to first try to do the investigation and gather evidence without restricting the constitutional rights of the persons to have a right to privacy. This is particularly sensitive when someone is talking to his or her lawyer, because this is a real private conversation, particularly when it happens within the premises of the prison. But nevertheless, criminal procedure rules were destroyed, and in a case of lawfare against the former vice president, his conversation with his lawyer inside the prison were heard and became publicly available. So there we have a very crazy example of how criminal procedure is not respected within the lawfare cases.
So in the example of filtering like a very sensible audio between somebody in jail and his lawyer, there has to be somebody who has to publish it. So obviously the role, especially of right-wing media, is very crucial as well. So which role does the media fulfill in the lawfare?
So we were talking a little bit about this in the beginning, but let's be even more specific. So if I go and I present a case against Lula in the in the courts, and nobody talks about it, who knows what happens in the courts? Who knows what cases are going on? The judiciary is very apart from general society and from the public. So without the media, we will not have lawfare. We need that presentation, that charge that is presented before court becomes known to everybody. Moreover, we need that everybody knows what is happening in the case. This is also against the innocence principle, because until someone is sentenced and convicted, we shouldn't talk about the crime that is charged against that person, because this gives the idea that he or she is already guilty, when indeed this hasn't been proven in court. But nevertheless, the media starts talking about the charges against Lula, the charges against Cristina, the charges against Evo, giving the idea that the person is already guilty. And it allows to make a connection between the judiciary, which is mostly working behind doors, and the public.
Yeah. So one thing is like the role of the traditional media, and another thing is the role of social media. So when you have like media repeating or questioning always the innocence of like the popular leader on social media, it's likely to be worse because people can participate. You can do like dirty campaigns against left-wing leaders. So what's the role of social media in the recent and current lawfare?
So, of course, the media works at certain times, at certain hours. We receive the newspaper once a day. We have like target show once a day at 8 p.m. But the social media is something that is happening all the time. That every time that we are in contact with our handies, then we are receiving information constantly. So social media is way more powerful. Also, we are not paying attention all the time, like to what we are reading or which is the source. So sometimes we know some information, but we don't even know where we read it. We don't know if the source was like a good source or not a good source. It's information that is coming through us while we're scrolling. So this is way more dangerous because it's information that comes to us almost unconsciously. And it's even more dangerous because not everybody that is writing in Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook or TikTok are real persons. We have this concept of trolls and bots. Trolls are people that are specifically hired in order to write messages in the networks, and bots are robots. So in some cases in Argentina, there were messages that were spread in Twitter and they didn't make sense in Spanish. So they were like a phrase that didn't make any sense. And that is how they found out that messages that were supposed to go against Cristina indeed were created by robots, because they didn't make any sense and they started to be replicated all the time by different users, but it didn't make sense in Spanish. In another case, where she was accused of some cases of stealing money when building a road, it was proven that more than 70% of the users writing against her on the day of a sentencing were trolls. So people specifically hired for that purpose. So this is the main problem of social media. And that's why in the book I suggest the concept of influencer criminology, because then in social media you have influencer trolls and bots that can create images and ideas about crime and punishment that are way more powerful than the ones that the traditional mainstream media used to have.
Yeah, that's a very interesting thing because nowadays the influencers, big social media pages, and lots of marketing agencies have lots of social media channels using bots on Twitter, WhatsApp, and anonymous Facebook pages. So TikTok as well, even worse nowadays. So it's a huge business for politicians to spend money in order to damage your political opponent's image and juridical situation as well. So, what do you think? How can traditional media and especially social media get regulated on one hand in order to guarantee certain rights to popular leaders and ordinary citizens, and on the other hand, uh, is it even sufficient to just regulate them, or do we need an open debate as society which type of content is okay to get shared and resent, and which type of content not?
Yeah. So of
And what
course,
about freedom of speech there? So there are like a lot of questions on my mind right now.
yeah, that's what I was saying. Like freedom of speech, of course, is very important and is a constitutional right, but there are a lot of constitutional rights. So it should be regulated that you cannot, for example, for example, here in Germany, there was this debate about talking about the race or the skin color of the person when it was being discussed in the media, right? So which is the purpose of saying that if the person was from Ethiopia or from Argentina? It didn't make any sense when we were describing a crime scene. That has to do with the fact that that data was only enhancing discrimination and xenophobia. So if we want to respect constitutional rights, there should be some rules. For example, if there is no certain conviction, we cannot talk in the media about guilty. We cannot say that the person have actually committed the crime. We need to have certain vocabulary. The person is accused. We need to have also journalists that know about the judicial procedure. We will not have like an ordinary journalist talking about COVID. There are experts that are being invited in order to talk about a pandemic. Okay, in the same line, when we are talking about criminal procedure, criminal law, things that are really complicated, we need to have some experts that can respect certain language that avoids giving fake ideas about guiltness when this has not already been proven. And of course, we also need, besides the regulation of the media, a strict control through civil society in order to know when fake news are spread. Because sometimes it's not just ignorance or a wrong use of language, but there is an explicit intent of distributing, of disseminating fake news. So in that case, we need to have certain control to know when the truth is being said and when it's not. And for that, we need actual research. We would even need to engage the academia to corroborate the news that are being spread through media and social media.
Just a little comment from me. In Bolivia, there's such a fact checker. So that's like typical for liberals. They see like the solution. We just have to fight fake news and then everything will be fine. So this fact checker, Bolivia Verifica, is a huge network of the biggest media outlets. There are like 90% of them are right wing. And it's financed by local governments, which are in opposition to the MAS, and the European Union. And when I was repeating the news, they were like doing good work, but just when it was about fake news against opposition leaders, and there were nearly no articles about fake news against popular or left-wing leaders. So it's kind of, we can see the tension behind it. Let me say it like that. But yeah, it's an important debate because we can't just get normal people to prison because they shared one fake news, but we have to guarantee, of course, like the right to not lie about anyone, because that's not not fair and not the right thing. Let me say so. Maybe let's continue with some more examples about lawfare in Latin America. It's kind of very strange, the comments right now. Maybe some Putin trolls, pro-Putin, anti-Putin trolls, I don't know. So can you tell us about other cases of lawfare? Like maybe the most prominent ones you already mentioned, Lula and Cristina Kirchner.
So in
What are other
Bolivia, where
famous
you
cases?
are, like there was an intent of perpetrating lawfare, accusing Evo of corruption, then trying to say that the
Fondo
election
Indígena is like very
or
famous.
death, or that the elections were not clean. But then this was not enough, and then they ended up with a traditional military coup d'état. But then we had lawfare also in Honduras, in Paraguay, in Chile, in Nicaragua, in Ecuador. Like the former president of Ecuador, Correa, he's not even able to go back to his country because of the charges of corruption against him. So it's something that has been spread throughout Latin America.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. There are many countries where it happens, and I think it still will be happening. You, yeah, you mentioned it in your last couple chapter as well. So lawfare is just one way of US imperialism toward democratic victories of progressive and partially anti-imperialist governments. So which other alternative strategies have been used to fight the left apart from the lawfare you just mentioned?
So, like the traditional, you mean the traditional dictatorship?
Yeah,
Yes. So yeah, so lawfare is like a backup plan, so to say. What the opposition, the neoliberal actors, and even the United States that has been directly involved in the coup d'état in the lawfare in Brazil. What they do is that first they try to pursue these lawfare strategies. So with through charges of corruption, try to delegitimize leaders that are in government, or stop them from competing for office. And when this doesn't happen, when this is not enough, as it was exactly in the case of Evo Morales in Bolivia, where despite of all this intense, he nevertheless won the elections, then the traditional dictatorship is always an option. So the military tanks were already there, very prepared to go there and take him out. And he had to find asylum first in Mexico and then in Argentina. And we had a illegal and lawful government in Bolivia for a long time. Hopefully, fortunately, not as long as it was expected in the beginning, but nevertheless, this happened. So there was an interruption of democracy. In Brazil, it was also the case that we didn't have a dictatorship, but we had like a removal from office of Dilma Rousseff. So through charges of lawfare, she was dismissed from government and she was not allowed to finish her mandate. So these are different legal and illegal strategies to attack the political opponent when democratic politics are not enough.
yeah, um, definitely. So yeah, like soft coups, parliamentary coups, or even like real military coups are options as well. But sometimes they're not very intelligent on the long term. At least if you want to govern democratically. Yeah, I think in Bolivia it kind of fired completely back. But there was actually another second coup attempt of the ex-defense minister, which is a kind of more serious thing because he's like a military guy and he would have made actually worse stuff than his like de facto president Agnes. But yeah, so let's maybe talk about the possible or maybe already ongoing second pink tide. So since 2018, there's like a new ghost going around in Latin America, or let's say a new pink tide with the presidency of AMLO, then the election of Alberto Fernandez, of Arce in Bolivia, of Pedro Castillo, Gabriel Boric in Honduras is a left-wing president as well, and possibly this year Gustavo Petro in Colombia, and Lula might win in Brazil. So you can observe or hope for a second pink tide, center-left, left reformist government, and most of the lawfare happened in the end, or to end the first pink tide, or to avoid a second one. What do you think about this danger of lawfare or other types of undemocratic behavior? Because recently we saw that big parts of the opposition have radicalized. So it is a common thing to be more anti-popular, anti-communist, racist, authoritarian, and to use racism, classism, negative stereotypes, corruption charges, and even to just shout election fraud, even if there are nothing to show that there was actually fraud. I mean, it wasn't just in Bolivia. It used to happen in Ecuador when Lenin Moreno used to be a left-wing candidate, but then became a right-wing politician. His opponent, the current president of Ecuador, Guillermo Lasso, he started to shout fraud, and it's a long tradition in Latin American politics. We might say that people sometimes don't accept election results and they just shout fraud. Sometimes frauds actually happen. Sometimes they were committed by the right. And so how do you see the possibility of undemocratic behavior, destabilization attempts, sanctions, economic warfare, and especially lawfare as well? What's your perspective? What might happen the next years? What's the biggest danger?
So indeed, it's a big danger, and it can be the case that lawfare continue affecting democratic politics in Latin America. There are some proposals and projects to try to find a solution at the continental level, or particularly in the southern cone through Parla Sur, because as we were mentioning, it's a continental problem where we have international organizations and international countries like the United States involved and pressuring for this lawfare to take place. So we also need regional continental responses to that. This also, of course, should involve some regulation of the media. It's not only like we were talking before about regulating and like the problems that this can bring in terms of freedom of speech, but it's also relevant to say that in Latin America, the media is very much concentrated. So there are very few corporations that own all the media. So it's not even necessary to constrain or like enter in very delicate measures against free speech, but just to go against these corporations that are super concentrated and that are indeed acting against the free speech because they don't allow alternative voices to come up, then we can have a solution against lawfare. So the democratization of the media, the creation of grassroots media like Eins 99, and to have way more community medias where people that are not repeating the mainstream discourse can speak up. This is extremely important. And this is a common problem with throughout all the countries in Latin America. So really having access to other kind of information that is not the one that is being repeated once and again by the radios, the TVs, the internet, that are all belonging to the same power holders, then it's vital to stop. It's vital to stop lawfare, and of course collaboration within this new pink tide, as you described. For example, if like Mexico or Argentina were not governed by social democrats governments that offered asylum to Evo Morales, we don't know what would have happened if he didn't have where to go. So the fact that there were some collaboration networks and that when something happened in one country, or the same with Lula, and there was a huge support for his campaign Lula Libre to give freedom to Lula, from the rest of the Latin American countries. So democratizing the media, looking for legal alternatives at the continental level in order to stop the misuse of the criminal justice system to persecute and criminalize populist leaders. And the collaborative networks among these pink tie can be some mechanisms to stop lawfare. And of course, and that's exactly the goal of the book, to spread the word, to make the lawfare understandable to all the people on the ground. Because if people on the ground, the public, even the people that are living in impoverished conditions and that will have more benefits from this government than from the neoliberal ones, think that the main problem of their lives is corruption and that they need to hate this kind of leaders, then we have a problem. So spreading the word, explaining how lawfare works, explaining that it's being used as a tool to manipulate the criminal law, the criminal procedure, in order to criminalize leaders in the opposition is vital in order to have a more informed and ready to fight population.
What do you think, which role can progressive digital activists, like in Bolivia, we used to call them digital warriors, those who defended the popular government of the mass, or like collective radio stations, or like democratized media projects, which role can they play in order to fight lawfare?
Well, as we were saying, like it's really important to have other voices than the mainstream ones. So these kind of grassroots media are really, really, really key. Also because people that are working on the ground can go there and speak up, because it's not only Lula or Cristina the ones that are being the target of lawfare. For example, in Argentina, in the province of Jujuy, we have Milagro Sala, who is an indigenous a grassroots leader who has been trying to fight against a very autocratic government in her province and trying to provide and allow the people in her province to have access to rights. She has been incarcerated for more than 5 years. And in these cases, we need that people that are living in small towns that maybe they don't have access to mainstream media, or they don't even like check social media, but they might listen to the local radio, can also have another narrative about what is happening with their leader. So of course, it's very important to have this kind of media, particularly at the same time that we are trying to fight against the concentrated corporate media at a more continental level.
Yeah. Another question: what do you think? Did progressive activists and ordinary people, for example, after the coup in Bolivia, like normal, like even poor people who didn't used to be very active in politics, started to get active again to kind of defend the rights they gained in the last process? So what I observed when ordinary people started to do activism again, to fight collectively for their rights, then they really got empowered. And I have the impressions they really learned the lesson, not just on like theoretical terms, and rather than that, like they learned how to communicate the necessities better into their community, and were able to kind of win some people back. And I think that was like maybe one central election, that like you need again a bigger pressure from the bottom up, that there has to be a real movement behind the party, and not just some like bureaucrats in the high position. Yeah. So would you share this analysis that social movements, progressive movement, can actually grow in the struggle against lawfare and other reactionary strategies? What would you say?
Yeah, totally. Really, like to have like people like that happened indeed, what you are describing in the last Argentinian elections. That it was very difficult for these populist politicians to get access to mainstream media. They didn't have like enough airtime. The same happened in the US, right? With Trump having like most of the airtime. It's not only in Latin America. And what you are saying, like this bottom up, this grassroots activism going like house by house, trying to spread the word about like the political program and trying to contradict or show the lies spread by mainstream media was really, really key to gain the elections. Indeed, the elections came as a surprise, the results, because if it was for what was said from the top down, it seems that the populist leaders didn't have any space or any word to say. But because of the activists on the ground, the outcome was very different than expected.
Yeah. So I think we are already at the point where we can finish soon. Do you have a final message for our audience? You want to give them? Do you have like a final thought? What's really important, like to conclude this topic? Something you want to tell us about, so we can understand better the lawfare.
Well, the main message is that lawfare is using criminal law in order to foster this delegitimation of the opposition leaders. And criminal law is the last resort that we have in our societies, in the global north and in the global south. So it's like a fight that we have to give globally, that criminal law cannot be used in order to mess up democratic policies. Criminal law allows the police, the law enforcement to intervene. Criminal law is what allows the prisons to be open for people that have not committed any crime but are just trying to take part in politics. And it can be very risky to allow this tool to expand. And as I was saying before, it's not only about the leaders, it's about the criminalization of politics at all levels. So it can go also from criminalizing a presidential candidate to criminalizing someone that wants to protest. All actions that involve democratic actions and involvement in politics should be protected and should not be the target of criminal law, because if not, the basis of even the bourgeois law, that is not anything revolutionary, but like a basic agreement within current society, will be damaged.
So before we stop, we got a question from Lars Busiek in German. I'm going to translate it. So Lars Busiek is asking whether democracy and not existing democratic structures are still part of the political destabilization through US interventionism against democratic governments. What's your take on it?
Yes, indeed. This is the case, and this was particularly shown by the so-called WikiLeaks. So there appeared a lot of communications between the people, in the case of Brazil, the people that were involved in the persecution of Lula, and people from the US Embassy. So these conversations were actually presented. And in the case of Argentina, many of the judges and prosecutors involved in the lawfare have been trained in the US and are usually invited by the US Embassy and US organizations to go there and receive training. So indeed, this is pretty clear in the current political situation.
So because there are no other questions, we are going to finish right now the interview. Thank you very much, Valeria. I'm very sure it was very interesting for our audience, and I'm so sorry for the technical difficulties we had, especially for our viewers. I'm so sorry. Es tut mir so leid. Entschuldigung, Leute. Yeah, sorry for this. Technical problems. We're going to unite the video, and I hope to see you at the next time at 99 zu 1. And please, Valeria, can you stay a moment in the stream? See you until the next time. Bye bye.
Leute, wir brauchen eure Hilfe. Wenn euch dieses Video gefallen hat, klickt auf Like, abonniert den Kanal und vergesst nicht das Glöckchen zu drücken, damit ihr benachrichtigt werdet, wenn wir neuen Content droppen.
Außerdem solltet ihr uns überall folgen, wo wir verfügbar sind. Das ist Facebook, Instagram, Twitter und Twitch. Und wenn wir irgendwelche Ankündigungen machen oder Posts, dann shared, was das Zeug hält. Gebt uns all eure Liebe.
Wir haben mittlerweile ziemlich signifikante Kosten. Wenn ihr es euch irgendwie leisten könnt, unterstützt uns doch auf Patreon. Dann kommt ihr auch in den Genuss verschiedener Vorteile, wie zum Beispiel Zugang zu unserer Discord-Community oder Zugang zu den ultrageheimen Patreon-Episoden, die wir dort posten. Außerdem könnt ihr uns natürlich auch über PayPal Spenden zukommen lassen.
Außerdem haben wir mittlerweile einen eigenen Online-Shop. Das heißt, wenn ihr euch immer noch fragt, was ihr euren Lieben zu Weihnachten, Ostern oder sonst wie schenken könnt, geht dorthin und kauft duftes Merch.
Alle Links dazu hier in der Beschreibung oder auch auf unserer Webseite 99zu1.de.
Vielen Dank fürs Dabeisein, danke für die Unterstützung und wir sehen uns in diesem Theater.